Hey guys, what's going on? It's Eli, back with another review video, and of course, continuing on reviewing more Christmassy films on the weekdays. And that's right, you read the title, and as was teased in the last review video, well, because this one Christmassy film that is related and has something to do with a Christmas carol, but the fact is, it's basically more like a biopic, and how the creation of one of the best, if not one of the best, Christmas stories of all time was written and created by Charles Dickens himself. And joining me, of course, my dad, aka Little Blue.
Happy to be here.
The bowing. Yeah. That's right, guys. Me and him, we are finally reviewing from 2017, The Man Who Invented Christmas. Yes, so The Man Who Invented Christmas. We'll start with you, because you were the first one to watch this, and before I did, because, yeah. What are the first things you have to say about this, and your thoughts, and, what you thought of this movie itself?
Well, it was a unique perspective. Everyone has seen, of course, A Christmas Carol, and you've either seen it live in a play, or you've seen it the many versions that
movie, TV adaptations,
and my favorite version is, of course, the one with Patrick Stewart.
And well, I'm the opposite of you because it's my number 2 favorite. My favorite is the Muppets Christmas Carol.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
Well, the thing is, a lot of people say that for both Muppet Christmas Carol and the one with Patrick Stewart, they stay very close to the original book. So,
well, I'll do the overview to kind of give it a treatment of what the movie's about.
Yeah.
1843 London. Author.
Well, hold on. You weren't even finished with your first thoughts on it. Were you?
Unique perspective. It was this perspective of Charles Dickens trying to write his story, A Christmas Carol, and it was it was very interesting to see how often he went through writer's block, and the characters kept coming into his life, and kept coming to life, and wanting to, trying to get him to do something with them, and and all this, and well, my character should do that, that kind of thing. Almost arguing with them.
And who wouldn't have that kind of experience where you only see it yourself? You're kind of like interacting with your own creations and such.
Exactly, and probably in a lot of respects, writers go through that. They'll struggle with. And argue with themselves even how a character should be presented in a story.
There you go.
And that was really what he was trying to find in the motivation of the characters and how he wrote them, and it was just really good.
Right. And as for me, because getting into the first things I have to say about it, my thoughts, well, I know that you've told me a couple of times that I would enjoy this.
Yes.
That I should definitely give it a watch.
Yes.
Of course, I knew I was going to, and when I finally did, well, I had a feeling to myself, and I know I told you this, that I probably was more likely going to enjoy it, and I sure enough did. Yep, because this, of course, did not disappoint for me. Everything about it was really good, and from beginning to end, and whom plays so-and-so and whom they're portraying, what this story had to offer and tell, and what was going through Charles Dickens, and hard to believe because, he went through some dark times heavily.
Mm-hmm. So, from the treatment, the overview.
But just overall,
right.
I really enjoyed The Man Who Invented Christmas, and it's nice that we did. It is a biopic, wouldn't you say?
Yeah,
I
would say so.
It's nice to see that, hey, we've got a biopic on how this all began when Charles Dickens wrote, if not, one of his best stories and one of the best Christmas stories ever told.
Right.
Yeah, in book history, I guess you could say. And
I would say there was a lot of liberty taken with artistic license and how it was portrayed, and
that's another thing, because
embellishment, no doubt.
And that's another thing, very quick, because it never fails with biopics. There's always going to be changes and tweaks.
Yeah,
it's not
make it more interesting.
Yeah, but here's the thing: it's got to make sense, and it's got to be done in a good way. Yeah. And how did you feel on that with The Man Who Invented Christmas?
I thought it was done very well. I thought so too. If it's to be taken literally, it explained a lot. It explained how he developed these characters and how he struggled with some of them, and whether or not Tiny Tim was going to die, and the fact that Tiny Tim was not going to die, and which would have just totally ruined the story if he had indeed died.
And to think
there was a vision of him dying, but it was only in Christmas Future, the Ghost of Christmas Future, that showed him what the future was going to be like if he didn't change his ways.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So.
All right, so as always, read the description / the story. You take it from here.
1843 London, author Charles Dickens finds himself in financial trouble after writing 3 unsuccessful novels in a row. Desperate for a hit, Dickens relies on real-life inspiration and his vivid imagination to bring Ebenezer Scrooge, Tiny Tim, and other classic characters to life in A Christmas Carol, forever changing the holiday season into the celebration known today. So if you look at the formula of A Christmas Carol,
yes,
is very similar to that of my favorite Christmas movie of all time, It's a Wonderful Life.
You're right, yeah.
And I was...
There are some similarities between almost to It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol.
I was an adult before I ever saw It's a Wonderful Life, and now I can't get enough of it because it's all about perspective, which is what A Christmas Carol is about. Yeah. It's all about perspective.
Which, by the way, me and my dad, just very quickly, we did our review of It's a Wonderful Life if you want to go check it out. So
yeah, and it really shows as Ebenezer Scrooge finds out in A Christmas Carol, and the way this character is developed throughout this movie. Mm-hmm. He has become, anybody can be a Scrooge.
Exactly.
You don't have to be rich. You don't have to be a curmudgeon, an old curmudgeon. You can be a young person, and you can be a Scrooge.
Yeah.
Because Scrooge is not always about. It's not always about giving money. It's about giving your time, giving your heart to other people, and being generous. Not just at Christmas time, but the whole year round. Just like Ebenezer Scrooge said, he would keep Christmas in his heart the year round. In the actual story. And honor it.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Charles Dickens, in being portrayed by Dan Stevens.
Yes, he did a very good job, by the way.
Yeah, I've known Dan Stevens best for, I think one of my earliest introductions to Dan Stevens was in Night at the Museum 3. Mm-hmm. He was Lancelot. Yeah, and he was also the Beast in the live-action Beauty and the Beast.
There's a lot of good actors.
Yes,
British
there
actors
is.
in this movie, that it was almost like a cattle call by the production company to say, hey, anybody want to be in this? And called up all the A-list British actors at the time to act in this movie.
Yeah, Bleecker Street, they did this movie.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that movie studio?
Bleecker Street, yes.
Yeah, but also Universal, they also distribute it. So I actually didn't quite fully realize that. Yeah, this is technically also a Universal film. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the rest of the cast, great people they have in this, like Miriam Margolyes, if I'm saying that right.
Miriam Margolyes.
Yeah, Mrs. Fisk, a.k.a. Professor Sprout in Harry Potter.
Exactly right.
And Charles' wife, Kate Dickens, Morfydd
Clark.
Yeah, and she would probably, as of now, be best known for being in the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power series. Mm-hmm. One of the main characters.
Justin Edwards.
Yep, Justin Edwards as John Forster, which he is Charles Dickens' right-hand guy or something.
He's also the Ghost of Christmas Present. So
yeah, and the fact that he took model inspiration from him, to describe on what the Ghost of Christmas Present looks like. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he's like his attorney or something, or agent, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
Charles
sort of
Dickens.
An advisor. Yeah,
yeah, and some of the others, like even Jonathan Pryce, who is the father of Charles, Mr. John Dickens. Mm-hmm. Yep. And the others, like, I know Ian McNeice, Chapman, because he was in season 5 and 6 of Doctor Who.
Yeah, so. Ian McNeice, who played Chapman in this.
Yes, exactly. But what else have we got to say, and what goes down in the film, continuing on?
Well, again, it's the whole film is really a journey of Charles Dickens struggling to write this to write this story, and he puts everything on the line. His
Yeah.
finances, everything, and he does not
Even
he
wanting
doesn't-
to acquire the rights and all to himself.
and he doesn't even want. He doesn't skimp on anything, illustrations, nothing. Everything is.
And he has like what, 1 or 2 months to get this out.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's you're really. It gets nerve-wracking at times. It really does, because you know what he's up against trying to get this book done. And then when it's finally published and he's holding it in his hands, you know, it's just like you see this masterpiece. Just not just the fact that he wrote this wonderful story, but also the way it's presented in this leather-bound book.
Exactly.
He spared no expense, and he put everything on the line because he was absolutely swinging for the fence, so to speak.
Yep, and even like say when he got an artist to, draw the pictures in the book,
Yeah.
And do you remember who that was? Because
I cannot remember who the illustrator was. It should be listed in the.
probably, well, they're randomly. Some of them are randomly listed. I hate when IMDb does that sometimes.
Yeah, it's not. I'm not seeing it here.
Well,
I'm trying to remember who it was. No.
Well,
not listed.
while I'm editing this, if I remember to do so, I'll put the name in the text. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's really strange.
But what else goes on in the film? Like, okay, because before he starts to create A Christmas Carol, because his past 3 books were flops. Like, did they describe which they were? Like,
I can't recall exactly what they were, but
obviously Charles Dickens. Okay, sure. Like, he's had some books that weren't really big successes, but he had other big successful like stories / books, not just A Christmas Carol.
Of course.
Like Oliver Tale. That one.
Oliver Twist.
Oliver Twist. Yeah, Oliver
Yeah,
Twist.
yeah.
Which, by the way, Oliver Twist would be the inspiration and the Disney film Oliver and Company. It's loosely based off of Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist. Yeah, so
Right.
So obviously Oliver Twist, like that was another really good story / book that he wrote. So, and if any of you are familiar with Oliver Twist, but a lot of moments that happen in this film because, to name some of the rest of the cast, like a lot of times, like one of the maids, Tara. Always interacting with Mr. Dickens, and Tara being played by obviously she's listed, and she was also she even played the ghost of Christmas Past.
It was interesting how some of those characters. Tara was Anna Murphy, right?
Anna Murphy, yeah. And what about Tara? Because in the time that her and Charles Dickens spent, and when it comes to writing and even reading what he wrote and such to her.
Yeah, it was interesting. She was a sounding board for him.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. It was an interesting relationship and an interesting dynamic between those two characters.
Getting to, and you know what? Very nice to getting to know some of the maids, that serve in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And also the guy who's doing the chandelier and such.
Yeah.
Yeah, moments with him, I think it's him, Cosimo Fusco playing Signor Mazzini. That has to be him. So.
Signor Mazzini, yeah.
Yeah, that clearly has to be him. So, because he's doing stuff on the ceilings and such, the chandeliers and so on, and also and also at times we would see the past life of Charles Dickens as a young boy. What about those? And with his father, most notably.
It was really emotional at times.
Yeah, young Charles being played by Ellie Salone. So
it was emotional at times. It got to be, you saw what a hard life he led and the things that he had, so yeah, it was
even. I was just going to say, even when at one point his father gets arrested,
yeah,
and his whole family's taken away.
Yeah, it
God,
was really sad.
And his father telling him to, chin up and so on, and poor Charles being forced to be in this warehouse.
Yeah,
jeez,
and work in that warehouse
exactly, and the warehouse, which even as he got older, it's still there.
And he goes back to it. You know,
Well, I mean, by that point, it was the building was still there, but it was abandoned.
Right,
So
right.
rightfully so abandoned.
yeah,
And the inspiration that Charles starts to find when writing and developing A Christmas Carol, well, and also when he is pitching this idea and didn't come up with the name at first, the official name, A Christmas Carol.
Right.
And even they were pointing out, like, one of, Chapman and Thackeray and such, like, and also the other characters like Hall, played by David McSavage, and as I just mentioned, Thackeray, Miles Chupp, if I said that right, Chupp.
yeah,
Okay, because they point out to him, like, he's pointed out that, no one really cares about Christmas.
right.
Must have happened in reality, of course, but I think when Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, Christmas became more loved, I suppose,
Yeah,
And, yeah, and also, again, more the inspiration he finds, like finding, say, a Scrooge, They'd rather if they'd rather die, they better do it, and increase the population of the earth and such. That whole thing. Finding someone who acts like a Scrooge, and also, learning the word humbug. And of course, we can't forget to acknowledge and mention him, the late legendary great Christopher Plummer, playing Scrooge.
yes.
Oh boy, because what do we have to say about Christopher Plummer in this movie?
And I mean, he's just an amazing actor.
What can we say? Because Christopher Plummer, always fantastic.
Always a fantastic actor.
And
yes.
you know what? He was perfect to be portraying Scrooge, but in Charles's mind,
Correct.
Yeah. And, well, because a lot of time that they spend, and even when, say, it comes to, say, both Charles and Scrooge, they meet with the ghost of Christmas, past, present, future. Even some of the other characters that interact with Charles and even kind of tag along with him and Scrooge, like one of them being Fezziwig, and
yeah,
and even like at one point, like them interacting with the ghost of Christmas Present, and even like of course we do see, say, Bob Cratchit, well, the Cratchits and such, and Tiny Tim, and not to mention the inspiration for Tiny Tim. Well, Charles Dickens having a sister, and his sister being married, husband, and their son, who is in the same kind of, I'd say almost same condition as the character of Tiny Tim.
Yes.
With a crotch and such, and coughing. Well, hold on, because, like,
had a crutch and walked on a crutch.
Yeah, because Fanny Dickens, being played by Katie McGinnis, and also, in Charles's mind, visioning her as Mrs. Cratchit. So, and Bob Cratchit, well, being played by Marcus Lamb, and in reality in the film, because he's Rev. Henry Burnett.
The Reverend Henry Burnett.
Yep.
Yes.
So, and Henry Jr., also Tiny Tim, Pierce Kearney, if I'm saying that right?
Pierce Kearney.
Thank you, yeah. But and what say on the rest of Charles's family members, And when most of them, they come into town.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, like I said, interesting dynamic with all these characters, how they interacted with each other.
Even like when Charles, how his interactions are with the fictional characters he's written.
Yeah.
And even when, like, say, obviously at a certain point, things, they just start to go downhill. And especially, like, as we kind of said earlier, like, Charles acting like a Scrooge almost.
Yes.
And how he interacts with his father, and his father was supposed to leave.
Right.
Yeah, what about that? And Charles realizing something that his father was doing, like...
Yeah, I don't know. It's what's your perspective on it? I'm kind of having a hard time.
I don't know. I mean, because something to do with, I guess, Charles's father, like, taking papers or something from him, and just, I don't know. But Charles being very upset with his father after leaving him behind and such.
Right.
Yeah. And even when, like, say, other moments where it starts to get really out of hand, the more time he spends writing and developing the story, even when he gets fed up at one point and asks for Tara to leave. But little did he know that by that, well, because she'd be fired and such. That's not what he intended for, obviously. And even when his wife confronted him that spending more time, like, say, with his fictional characters than his own children.
True.
I don't know, because it's not, okay, obviously not, he didn't do that intentionally, but no, nothing really, but it's just, the work and the pressure that's on him trying to get this story written, trying to come up with what comes next in page after page, and even when struggling with, if Tiny Tim survives or not.
That's right.
Yeah, because it's amazing he didn't quickly think of that Tiny Tim does live.
Right.
Yeah, and even because Charles is arguing with his own characters and, get back to work and such, and yeah, it's amazing. And even when, because at times we see the warehouse, and when he goes back to the warehouse and still having flashbacks, and even when Scrooge once again confronting him.
Yes.
And, what about that?
It was interesting. Again, the whole thing is the way he interacts with these characters, the one that's in his mind that aren't really there, but
yes.
there in his mind, and how they interact with each other, and how they influence him.
Yeah.
And influence his life, really.
And for us
and his perspective on life.
Yeah, and for us audience witnessing this as well. So.
Exactly.
And even when there's a tombstone, and no name is written on it, but, Scrooge going down under the tombstone, and, it's his grave, and, that's when, still, Dickens getting more ideas for what comes next in the book, and Scrooge, speaking directly to Dickens, that he will honor Christmas and in his heart and such.
Right.
And and once again, getting more ideas and such. And that's when, because realizing that, because with the future being altered and Scrooge changing his ways, and Tiny Tim surviving. Yeah, and especially because, for one of those things that, not just the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future, but even Tiny Tim. Tiny Tim put a change on Scrooge.
Yes.
We know this, of course, so it wasn't just that, but it was especially Tiny Tim. And even when, at first, it seems like Tiny Tim might have died if Scrooge hadn't changed his ways.
And that was a turning point in the story of A Christmas Carol. That was really that, and the fact that Scrooge himself saw that when he died, nobody was going to remember him. Because everybody was glad that he died. Because he was forgettable.
Don't care how he died or anything. Just glad that he's gone.
Yeah, and it was really sad. But I think really the turning point for him was obviously with Tiny Tim.
Yes.
Seeing that Cratchit's son was going to die.
Yeah.
And he knew that he might be able to change that destiny, the destiny of Tiny Tim, which he did.
And Scrooge, even he said to himself that he didn't know how much allowance he gave Cratchit, and nor did he know that he and his wife had a sick child,
right,
and such.
Well, because he was so self-consumed,
and he didn't ask.
With his own, he lived in his own world. He didn't care about anybody else.
You go.
He had based on his past, and you could see that there was pain in his life. He turned down the love of his life for money, and for fortune, and
that's another thing too, because even Charles got inspiration from Scrooge not, staying with a loved one, even it was John Foster, a fiance of his, something like that,
right,
yeah,
and but the whole point of it was that Scrooge saw in A Christmas Carol, and I think as much as Charles Dickens himself saw,
and when he was coming up with more ideas,
that he was self-absorbed and just completely into himself to where he just shut out the world.
And that's another thing, because even Scrooge, the character himself, in Charles' head, saying that nobody changes, but who says nobody can?
People do change. They can change. If
they sometimes can. If there's a real miracle for that.
And there are what's called in psychology significant emotional events.
Yeah.
That can change someone's personality.
Even Tara did point that out to Charles about that on why can't Scrooge change and such.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if basically when the Ghost of Christmas Future.
Yeah, we don't get that much of the Ghost of Christmas Future in this.
But that the Ghost of Christmas Future literally put the fear of God into him, into Ebenezer Scrooge, to the point that
let's also remember that the
changed his whole life.
Let's also remember that the Ghost of Christmas Future is also death.
Of course,
yeah,
of course, and that's because it's even the Bible says it's appointed for every man to die. Every man dies. That's just the way it is. You're born to die. You will die someday. And it's what you make getting between point A, being your birth, to point Z, which is your death. What you do for your entire life from those 2 points, from one point to the next, is what's so important. It's what you leave behind. It's how you affect other people. Just as much as George found out in It's a Wonderful Life, he found out that it was, that he touched so many lives, and if he had never been born, much as Scrooge discovered that even in life, even when he died, he touched no one.
Yeah.
So which would be worse, to realize, to see?
I mean, that's kind of tough competition.
It is. On the one hand, you see what it would be like if you had never been born, and see the changes in people's lives and how their lives would be different if you had never been born. And
it would be a scary thought on that.
I think the saddest would be is if you could see the future and see your death and see your own grave and realize that no one, that you hadn't touched anyone, even in life.
Yeah.
That would be the saddest part of all, because then you would be, you would be a failure as a human being, which Scrooge was destined to be if he didn't change his ways, his whole life.
And thankfully he did.
Yes.
Yeah, through the ghost of Christmas Past, Present, Future, and Tiny Tim especially.
And it was the way Charles Dickens wrote that story through this movie, and how it developed, and how you saw turning points and taking turns in the story okay, now he's on the right track. You would see that throughout the movie. Okay, now this is the story. He's on the right track. Then he'd divert again, and he would struggle with himself, and then he would go on. He would get back on the right track, and finally he ends it, the way it's supposed to be.
And when he officially is near the end and is right, he figures it all out, that Tiny Tim lives, Scrooge changes ways, the end. And he realizes the end. And he starts running and dashing to get this out there to be published and such. And thankfully, Tara, she came back. And and even say, there's a book or something that I think, Charles lended her, something to do with vampires. Yeah, all that. But overall, because it's great that Tara came back. And obviously, we see a little later that she's been rehired as one of the maids. And he patches things up with his father, And even earlier in the film, do you remember this, obviously, that his father, sadly, there's not that much of her. Mrs. Dickens being played by Ger Ryan, the mother, of course. It's interesting that we don't get that much of her. But I don't know. It turned out fine, with her being there. But again, they brought this talking crow.
Yeah,
remember that? Because even some of the maids, especially what's her face, not thrilled with a crow being there. But overall, again, Dickens patching things up right when his parents are about to leave, but not wanting them to leave because Christmas and such. And thankfully, Charles managed to get his story now entirely finished and just in time to be published, and even when convincing, what's some face to get this published. And like you said earlier, when he receives a copy of the book, and how happy he is that, he managed to accomplish, during those months to get it out there. And now, it doesn't take too long for the book itself, the story that he's written, to be one of the best that he's ever written.
But it's a classic. The story is a classic. The book is a classic. The movies are classic.
Yes, every adaptation. Well, let's face it. There have been some Christmas Carol adaptations that have kind of.
Yeah.
There's no denying. I mean, even though they do their best to tell the same story, still,
you cannot divert from that story. You
can't.
You cannot deviate from what Charles Dickens wrote because then it's no longer Christmas.
And
story.
You can't change that much.
I think the most successful modern spin on that story was done with Bill Murray as Scrooged.
Oh, really?
Because that movie, if you watch that movie, it follows that pattern. It's not the same characters, except for the Ghost of Christmas Past, Present, and Future, and they all appear to him. it's a completely, it's a different take on that story. It follows the formula just like the original book, but it's a modern day spin. I thought that was very successful and very funny.
Yeah, there's a little slight tweaks and such with the
Oh, of
Ghost of
course,
Christmas.
yeah.
Well, I'm talking about the Ghost of Christmas Past and Present, actually.
Yeah.
If you think about it, I mean, mainly the Ghost of Christmas Past has always been portrayed like, in some ways, like a woman or something.
Yeah, well, the
You
Ghost
know,
of Christmas
so-
Present, in this case, she was pretty violent.
And played by what's-her-face, fantastic actress.
Yes, who also plays the engineer right now on Star Trek Strange New Worlds.
And was also Billy Crystal's on-screen wife in Princess Bride.
Yeah.
You know, liar!
Yeah, but she's a fantastic actor.
Yeah, done a lot more than all that we just mentioned.
And she, yeah, exactly. But in
Well-
that case, she beat the crap out of Bill Bill Murray's
I mean,
character.
that is your opinion on, what you've said about Scrooged.
Yeah.
Another one that, you know what, is a pretty good one, that be the one, and you joined me reviewing this, the one with George C. Scott.
Yeah, George C. Scott did an excellent job with that. But again, my favorite is Patrick Stewart as
Mine too, as well
Ebenezer
as
Scrooge. I
mine-
mean, it's just you cannot. Well, you can't beat Patrick Stewart. I mean, you just can't.
No.
His acting skills are so deep.
And again, mine too, and also Muppet Christmas Carol. I mean, come on, what's say again? This is Michael Caine we're talking about as Scrooge. Yeah,
Exactly. Michael Caine.
yeah. And to finish up, The Man Who Invented Christmas, because now everybody has come together for Christmas. Even Mr. John, and this time with him is his his fiance, because the mention of his fiance's father being, pardon my French, kind of an asshole and such, but he changed his ways, and I think it had to do with A Christmas Carol.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, yeah, as far as I recall. But yeah, everybody together, and even when, Scrooge reads this speech about Christmas and such, and yeah, even the Black Crow we've seen a couple times, and we, for one last time, see Charles Dickens' fictional characters in his office.
Right.
And, Merry Christmas to all and such, and, the crow flying off, and there's, and in most biopics, aftermath texts, that whole thing.
Right.
And yeah, just what a great way to end off The Man Who Invented Christmas.
Great movie. Great movie.
Absolutely. And yeah, but just what are our final thoughts and results on The Man Who Invented Christmas?
It was a unique take on Charles Dickens.
Yes.
It showed us the man behind. It gave us a glimpse of the man behind A Christmas Carol, and gave us a different perspective on the process he went through, the dilemma, and almost tortured, mentally tortured at times, trying to write this story.
Mm-hmm.
And
in those 1 or 2 months,
Yeah, and he, but it was the interaction between the characters, he and the characters in his book, in his mind, that were appearing before him. It was great. It was just absolutely great. I give it high marks. It was a really, really, really good movie.
Yeah. And as for me, couldn't have said it better like what you've said, but I'm glad that I've finally had gotten around to watching this. And again, as I said, the couple of times you told me that I really need to watch this, which I did, it was no disappointment for me. Everything that this biopic of Charles Dickens writing, if not one of the best Christmas tales of all time, what this film had to offer from beginning to end, with its cast of characters, whom was portraying who, and the fact that we see that Charles, in his vision, and we see it too, his fictional characters and such.
Yes.
And having the late, great Christopher Plummer portraying Scrooge perfect, and Dan Stevens was good as Charles Dickens. Everybody in this film were all fantastic. And this film having some funny moments, some heavy, emotional and depressing moments, for sure. And all that struggling that Charles took during those 1 or 2 months to get this story written, and the situations that he went through, but in the end, he got it all figured out, and in the end still, it all turned out great for him and his family. A lot of things that were first not good, but things patched up, most notably for John Forster, and so on. Just, yeah, what more do I have to say? It was fantastic, without a doubt.
Yes.
And how we rate it, we'll start with you. How do you rate it?
I give it 4 out of 5 stars.
Really?
Actually 4.5 stars. I can't say it's perfect, but it was so
Yeah.
it was
And
it was close to perfect. It was. That's why I give it 4.5.
And like I just said, not every biopic is going to stay true to the actual events.
No.
But like I said, they have to make sense and they got to work.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, for The Man Who Invented Christmas, they worked.
They did.
Yeah, so I see your point, and it makes sense. And as for me, well, yeah, I'm giving it 8 out of 10 stars. For you, 4.5 stars?
4.5 stars.
Yeah. That for you, and for me, 8 out of 10 stars for The Man Who Invented Christmas. Yeah, again, everything about it fantastic, even the music and score. What more do we have to say? And what about you guys? What did you think of The Man Who Invented Christmas itself? What were some of your favorite moments? Do you think it was really awesome that we got a biopic / story on how this all began with Charles Dickens writing one of the best Christmas tales of all time, and whom starred in this movie, and whom betrayed who? Again, the moments that happen in this movie, from some funny, dark, depressing moments. Yeah, just everything about The Man Who Invented Christmas. What did you think of it? And with what me and my dad had to say about it, our review, and yeah, what did you think of our review? Leave comments and give this review video a like, as always. And so, with all that being said, thank you very much for watching. We hope you guys enjoyed our review of The Man Who Invented Christmas. More reviews are coming your way. They're going to be awesome. Keep looking forward, and we will see you guys in the next video / review. Any last words? Say goodbye and such?
God bless us, everyone.
Very fitting. He says that. For me, again, thank you for watching, and stay tuned because, well, the next Christmassy film I'll be reviewing, let's just say, it's Eddie Murphy's first full Christmassy film. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. I'm sure you guys do too. Again, stay tuned for that later tonight. Take care, peace out, and like what you said, God bless us, everyone.